Welcome back to Sharing Boulder, Aaron. So I asked you a question right after we turned the camera off that was something you wanted to add to the podcast. So we're back online here. I was a little surprised that you used the word force in a context of something you'd be willing to participate in. And it came up with the discussion on homelessness of forcing people to not. And it was more about vocabulary kind of, but I know it speaks to something deeper in your philosophy. And the reason I know that is because, I suspect it is because your email address is literally, has a domain called unforced.org. I believe that's what it is. Can you talk about that, please?
Yeah, so first I'll describe the domain. So yeah, my dad, I mentioned earlier, he passed right as I was graduating college. His name was Joe Neyer. He was a carpenter as well as a Tai Chi teacher. And spent a lot of time in nature, really dove deep into Taoist philosophy. And one of the core philosophies in Taoism is Wu Wei. And Wu Wei means to flow like the river. That's a very loose translation, but essentially to flow, how the river flows, how things flow on their own accord. They're unforced. The river is unforced. It flows on its own. And while the river is unforced, the river is also a force of nature. And the river, in a way, uses force and makes its way through wherever to reach the ocean.
And also constrained by the geography around it.
Yeah.
Right? So it's not flowing over the mountains.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it operates within its limitations and continues to move as is its nature. And so I just spent a weekend on a rafting trip. It was like an ecotherapy weekend rafting trip that my friend put together. And one of the things I was really asking for the river to teach me what it is to be unforced while using force. Because I think we can fall into this unforced thing that almost becomes passive and it's just like, cool, everything's happening, let it all happen.
Anything goes. Yeah.
And that doesn't work on its own. Like the force is needed. Like there is this motion that's needed. And where I'm like really grounding in is like the river is easy, but it's engaged. And I had this like thought while I was out rafting that if I want to really get somewhere, I could run on the side of the river and be really engaged. That's really hard. Or I could just sit and watch the river go by. I'm not going to get anywhere. If I want to get somewhere effectively, I need to get in the river, whether I'm swimming or on a raft or whatever. But I need to be engaged enough that keeps me in motion, that keeps me safe in navigating it. And so you don't want to
be sideways in the rapids.
Exactly. You have to use enough force to get where you need to go. And for the most part, you just want to let the river carry you.
Yeah.
So this is kind of what unforced means to me, is like flow with what is natural, but recognize that effort has its place, that force has its place, but it has to be used intelligently. You can't just like try and lift the river and bring it over here. But within the river, you can paddle an oar, you can direct yourself a little bit. And so this is, to me, I was talking about force in the context of homelessness. Like, I think there is force, but not as in like, you need to go and do this, you need to go and do this, but force as in, here, I'm going to nudge you in this direction. I'm going to nudge you in this direction. There's help over here. Yeah. There's help over here, and I want you to get help. And to do that, I'm going to nudge you a little bit.
And because, watch out, there's rapids coming.
There's rapids coming there. And like, I don't want you to get caught up in drug addictions and things that a lot of people can, because I can see where that trajectory is going for a lot of homeless people. Yeah. And I want that to not happen. But it can't be my way or the highway. It can't be me coming in and saying, you need to go and talk to this social service person and get into this housing. Like, I don't know what the answer is for everybody, but if I'm attentive to where somebody is at, if I'm attentive to their needs, and this is why I was speaking of getting out there and building relationships with people, not just like having a bunch of police coming out and using force, but getting people who are trained in mental health, who can actually go and build relationships and understand. If we have people going in there and engaging with the unhoused community, then we can know what effort's going to be useful. And we can see this person is in a dangerous spiral. Maybe there's some amount of force, but it can start with gentle nudging unless it becomes absolutely clear that more force is needed.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that metaphor and philosophy. And it's a touching that you connected that to your father and his what he shared with you as you were growing up. That's really cool.
Thank you very much. Yeah, he's a big part of why I'm showing up for this. Like, he had a huge care for what was happening on the planet, and I imagine that he had thoughts about getting into politics. I don't remember if he ever mentioned that, but like, I know that he cared a lot about what was happening in his community. And so, yeah, I think me being as involved as I am is a way of really, really honoring him and
Cool.
my mom as well, and
Beautiful.
like supporting that. So
Nice.
yeah, thank you so much for asking that. I feel honored to be able to share a little bit about him.
We ain't throwing starfish here, now we're having a good party. Talking about structural change. We believe the land is sacred, even beneath that vacant parking lot, where the weeds are doing their best to express the need for something different. Gonna make some space for you and me to live here all together. Gonna make it safe and fun for kids to get around the town. Gonna find me a residential pedestrian district where I can gracefully grow older. Gonna spend my remaining years sharing Boulder.
Hello, Boulder and the wider world. This is the Sharing Boulder podcast. My name is Philip Ogren, and for episode 40, I spoke with Aaron Gabriel Neyer, who is a community builder and technologist with a background in computer science and ecopsychology. Aaron is running for city council, and so I sat down to talk with him about his vision for what's possible in Boulder. We sat together in the shade at Growing Gardens Community Gardens and had a long conversation that touched on many subjects, including his nomadic travels, adventures in ecstatic dance, building community, living systems theory, and how these inform Aaron's vision for governance in Boulder. When the interview ended, I asked Aaron a follow-up question about a word choice he had made that surprised me. We decided to turn the recording equipment back on, and what came next was the beautiful tribute to his dad and the description of the river as metaphor that you just heard. I showed up to this interview feeling down and low on energy. In fact, I arrived about 10 minutes early and laid down on a picnic table bench, and when Aaron arrived, he found me sleeping. I left our meeting feeling energized and optimistic and thankful for our time together. I arrived to our meeting with a kind of amused skepticism of his nature-loving hippie vibe, which features playful tattoos and tanned bare feet, and left impressed by his powerful presence that exudes connection to the physical world, the world of ideas, and the community he is helping build here in Boulder. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Aaron Gabriel Neyer. Programming note: I am pleased to announce that this episode was edited by a listener, Catherine Avery, who offered her podcast editing services to me. There's not much she can do about the quality of the equipment I use or the nonsense that comes out of my mouth, but I hope you will find that this episode has less background noise, better audio balance between the two speakers, and fewer verbal pauses, if, you know what I mean. So, a special thanks goes out to Catherine Avery for helping assemble and edit this episode. Hello, Aaron. Welcome to Sharing Boulder. Thank you so much for making time to be here today. Go ahead and just, give us a little thumbnail sketch of what you're all about.
Awesome. Thanks, Philip.
Yeah.
A little bit about what I'm about. I'm a Boulder resident. I love Boulder. I was a nomad for a long time before I moved to Boulder, and I visited a lot of places and found a lot of beauty. And in all my travels, I never found anywhere that I loved quite as much as Boulder. And so I'm so glad that I get to call this place home. I have a background in technology. Have spent a good bit of time working as a software engineer. Most recently worked as a developer relations engineer at Google here in Boulder. I also have a background in ecopsychology, nature connection. So I have a master's degree in ecopsychology from Naropa, have a lot of experience with nature meditation, how we practice mindfulness in nature, have experience with permaculture design, using living systems principles. And I really feel passionate about how kind of all those spheres come together. So that's a little bit about me. Other things about me, I love music, I love dance, and I love to laugh. And I'm told that I have one of the most recognizable and memorable laughs that people have ever interacted with.
Okay, well, I hope we can evoke some of that in this conversation, because I do some comedy, so maybe we're a match made in heaven. We'll see. So I'm curious about. You said you were a nomad for a while. That evokes all kinds of things for me, like from couch surfing to camping to backpacking and whatnot. What did it look like for you?
Yeah, I graduated college in 2015, and I kind of went on a little soul searching thing. My dad passed right as I was graduating college, and so it was like processing a lot of grief and like finding a lot of healing with that, and just kind of finding myself in that new phase of not having my dad around, but also being graduated. And so before I started a new job as a software engineer in San Francisco, I spent 3 months hopping around to different music festivals, went through the 50th anniversary Fairly Well Grateful Dead show, and just got to taste a lot of what was possible. And so after that, I moved to San Francisco and worked as a software engineer for a bit there, but I was not in the space where I really wanted to be in a typical 9-to-5 job. And it felt like I was called to something different. And so I went on a little vacation to an ecstatic dance retreat in Hawaii and ended up staying there for 2 months and quitting my job and kind of deciding to start traveling full time and explore a little bit more of what life had in store. So spent a good bit of time, like winters in Hawaii for a few years, and then mostly driving around the US. Usually had a car. At one point I had a car that had a tent that folded off the top so I could kind of just like sleep wherever. For a while I was really into music festivals, transformational festivals. And then it was also just connecting with a lot of people. I connected with like a lot of visionaries who are like, hey, how do we shift paradigms? How do we invite more connection? And so there was like always this lens of systems change and like connection, and also this lens of just enjoyment and just connecting with community. So it was kind of bopping around in those spaces for many years.
You ever go to Burning Man? You kind of have a Burning Man look about you. No offense.
I've gotten that for a long time, and last year was the first year I actually went to Burning Man. I would be going there this year, but got to prioritize city council things.
Totally, yeah. So excuse my ignorance, but I honestly don't really know what ecstatic dance means. If that's like a proper noun, or if that just is a very general statement of some kind of dance. But can you explain what that is?
Yeah, I mean, in general, I don't know enough about the origin story, but in general, it is a very free-form dance. So it's basically usually a DJ is going up and playing a set for an hour and a half, usually electronic music, sometimes tribally flows, and then it's very free-form dancing. A lot of hand-wavy, arm flowing, and people just rolling around, moving. Contact improv is deeply woven into that, so it's kind of like a partner dance where you're like making contact, and so it's a very expressive and free-form style of dance that has kind of created its own little community around people who really love that kind of expression.
Well, the short conversations that we've had so far, you keep referring to your community, and you seem really plugged in and really surrounded by people that love you, that you love. And I don't know if you'd be willing to just like give us a little sketch of what you mean by when you say my community.
Yeah. There's like two levels of that. There's a community that I feel really plugged into in Boulder, and there's also like a lens I held of like every one of us has our own community. So like the community, when I look at my community, I include people in Boulder Progressives, like they're becoming a part of my community. People in a lot of these spheres, my community is very much widening, but also usually when I use that term, there is a community that I feel deeply woven with here in Boulder, but also beyond, like. And I think it centers around a lot of shared values. Like people really love expression and really love community. One of my friends playfully calls us communitors. We're kind of like addicted to community. And I think that's a fair criticism at times. But I think a lot of love for dance, a lot of love for music, a lot of people who really, really share a vision for a more beautiful world. And I would say I've found this community a lot through transformational festivals, music festivals, ecstatic dance, but it's expanded a lot beyond that. I do kirtan a lot. There's like a lot of this like interfaith spirituality that feels very non-dogmatic but flowing and open. And so a lot of the community I connect with is regularly coming together, sharing potlucks, sharing in dance, sharing in music, and just building bonds. And because this community like that I feel a part of values connection, I see this community all over the place. And like, I have a lot of shared community in St. Petersburg, Florida, a lot of shared community in Nevada City, California, in Ashland, Oregon, in Asheville, North Carolina.
Area, perhaps?
A lot of shared community in the Bay Area. And there's because there's this like interest in travel and migration, there's a lot of cross-pollination between these spaces. And so I have friends who come between these spaces. I've been to all those spaces and built community there. And so there's kind of this cross-pollination. And one of the beautiful things for me is that so much of that community loves travel, and so much of the community that I've met while traveling, be it in like Standing Rock activism, Bernie Sanders activism, like so many of these spaces, so many of them I now know here as like fellow community members of Boulder, because a lot of this traveling community has also, as I have, fallen in love with Boulder and seen a lot of potential for what can be here.
Well, that's really cool. And that makes me feel good to hear you talk about that, because one of the things I just worry about is the isolation epidemic of people living in sprawl, driving everywhere, going in, pulling into the garage without interacting with neighbors, and sitting and watching TV and heating up convenient food, And I just crave for humanity that everyone feels connected, And one reason I'm so passionate about housing is because I feel like the structures we occupy really impact the serendipity and the just sort of organic ability to have relations with each other, So I assume that's something you're thinking about all the time.
Absolutely. So I mean, you were at the occupancy.
Yeah, hearing.
Yeah. So I testified there, and one of the things I spoke about was, so living systems theory is a huge part of my philosophy.
Okay.
And what I was speaking about there is, in a living system, the health of a living system is intimately connected with the connectedness of the system. Like, how healthy a system is depends on how many connections are and how the diversity and the connection. And so a healthy brain. Yeah,
I was going to say. So you're actually doing this with a space in your hands that's the size of a brain. It's like, that sounds like a brain.
Yeah. So I mean, this is like cognitive science, neuroscience. Like a well-connected brain is a healthy brain. And so when we have a healthy mind, we're able to recognize connections across all kinds of different spaces. Yeah. And it's the same thing with society. If we have a lot of effective connections, we're going to have a healthier society. And so this is where, like, for me, one of the most important things is, how do we bridge connections across different spaces to ensure that our society is holistically connected? And that doesn't mean just like creating this little bubble of connection, but like our society as a whole. How do we facilitate more connectedness of that? Because that connectedness is going to contribute to the well-being and the health of the whole thing. And so,
Yeah, talk about a nice framework response to the polarization that we see in so many different areas of politics and other spheres, So that's really cool.
And that's where one of the things I think we miss in politics is we get so caught up on the what. We get so caught up on what is the right policy, what is the right approach.
I'm super guilty of that. I always want to really just dissect what's the right way to vote on this thing.
And the what matters, but what matters more, I think, that we miss is the how. How are we making decisions? How are we coming to the right one? Because I think there is a right approach, or at least like there is an effective approach.
Yeah.
But to come to the effective approach, we have to question how we're coming to that.
There are effective approaches.
Yes.
Like there's lots of ways to move forward, and a lot of them will be helpful. And
exactly. And I think the way we come to the effective approaches is by actively questioning how we come to those decisions, how we come to our conclusions, questioning how we think, and how we think not just individually, but together. Yeah. And from that, discovering more effective ways of us collectively making decisions. And I think if we start by that, it kind of moves us beyond the polarization and moves us into connection. Because while the 9 people on city council may disagree about a lot of things, they share the fact that they're all on city council and they all have an interest in improving Boulder. Yeah. And most of them share a lot in common, but like this is anywhere in politics, because we're not emphasizing the connection, we get caught up on identifying with our polarized positions, and then we make ourselves separate. What I say is, like, start with the human being, start with what we're carrying, hold our positions lightly. If we can hold our views lightly, then our views can change, and we can bounce views off each other, and there can be some conflict in it, but we're not letting that move us into separation from like our fellow council people, our fellow community members who are all interested in making decisions. So start with the connection between our council people, start with the connection within our community, start with helping us be more well-connected. And if we're more well-connected, we're going to make better decisions because we're coming from a place of connection.
Yeah, interesting. When you're talking and the way you started, I kind of wanted to ground what you were saying in process, because a lot of what city government is rules for the rules, and established customs around how we move forward from here, you know. And there's a work plan, and there's priorities on that plan, and you don't get to just show up at city council and say, hey, I want to vote for this thing today because it would change everything. Yep. But process isn't really what you were talking about. I think. I mean, you were kind of at a more abstract level, but
the process. We do need more effective processes. I think that is a huge part. I think the process of our government needs to change. And so, it is kind of a little abstract at that level. Like, yes, we need to emphasize connection. And from that, we're going to have different processes. And I think there does need to be a change in rules. And I'm doing my best to understand what rules would go into place effectively. And the deeper part for me is again, how we're making those rules. And are we actually looking to understand each other? And so I think one of the roles city council plays is modeling. Like, city council is modeling for Boulder, modeling how we make decisions. And so I think we need to emphasize the embodiment of city council more, emphasize like how council is actually embodying a decision-making process and how we're doing that. And I think that starts by having people on council who are able to listen deeply to each other, look to understand, and from that, make clear decisions. And I think the rules matter because rules and structures are going to support that kind of relating. I don't think complete anarchy, like, okay, everybody show up and just relate as a great human being.
We're just going to feel good. We won't leave till we all feel good about what's going on.
That really doesn't work. I've been to some rainbow gatherings in the past, and like, while I love a lot of things about the rainbow, it's a shit show in a lot of ways. And I think
I don't know what rainbow gathering means.
Rainbow gathering was a thing created by a bunch of idealistic hippies back in the 70s.
Okay.
Who were like, let's come together and demonstrate a new way of doing society. And so it's everybody shows up and camps on public lands and makes food, and there's no money involved, and everybody's helping everybody. And there's a beauty to that. There's a beauty in the idealism, but also it lacks a systemic understanding of how change can actually happen, and it has a lot of like unintentional side effects, like 10,000 people come and gather in public lands. That has a huge effect on the ecology. So I love a lot of things about like that kind of culture. But there's also, like at the end of it, they do this massive circle, and they're about everybody gets heard. So people go around the circle and everybody talks for as long as they want. And people are there for days listening to some people ramble on and on and on. And so it doesn't work to just have total, like, everybody shows up and is totally free. We need some level of structure. We need structures and systems that are going to hold us in right relationship. But we need to not become overly dependent on those structures. We also need to have the embodiment component of how we're relating with that.
Yeah, the word that kind of pops into my head is boundaries. You know, to have understandings of appropriate boundaries for decision making, relations to each other. Like, I think of 10,000 people in a field as being probably, it could be really traumatic for people who need a certain amount of space from others, you know, like, and so, and this applies to neighborhoods, right? Where we have different levels of interest in community and intensity of activity and, you know, all this kind of thing. So
absolutely. Yeah. Neighborhoods are a really, really good example for it, because, you know, we each have our little house and we have our own boundaries, but then like those boundaries don't contain us. We have our wider sphere of our neighborhood, and how do we allow for the connection within that wider sphere while also honoring the boundaries? Like, you know, we have things like we want to keep sound and things relatively contained so that we're not disrupting the neighbors, but also we want to have an open enough system that we're still like going out and maybe knocking on neighbors' doors and like getting back to that old style of neighborhood where you're like inviting them over to gatherings and
helping people out.
Helping people out. And so I think that's it. And like, again, that goes back to living systems that have permeable membranes. Like we have a membrane, we have a boundary, but that boundary is permeable. Like energy and information flows in and out of it. And so I think like embodying that better and recognizing that our house is a whole living self-contained system, but that is also part of a larger system of a neighborhood, that is also part of a larger system of a city, and how to embrace that like micro macro.
Cool. Well, I think this is a nice segue. What you just said is a nice segue to what I would love to dive into next. So we're here at the Growing Gardens. I'm not sure what the proper name is. It's Community Garden. I've heard Cultiva as a name associated with this.
I have heard Cultiva. Growing Gardens, as far as I know it, Growing Garden is the organization that maintains this whole space. And they have a lot of gardens that are explicitly managed by that organization. And then there's a lot of gardens that people in the community are able to apply to have their own plot of land here. And so there's kind of this community involvement here while also having some organizational management that facilitates food going where it needs to go.
And do you have a plot here?
I do not.
Okay.
Yeah,
are you connected somewhere? Or you just like the space?
I'm new to the neighborhood, and I have fallen in love with this place right away.
Yeah, totally.
I was attending an event with Harvest of All First Nations recently, and they are deeply, deeply embedded in this. So I'm getting connected into what they're up to, what Growing Garden's up to, but for now, I'm just really loving what's happening.
I thought I would just share that I don't have a deep connection with this particular community, this garden either. But my children, two of them went through the, I don't remember exactly what it was called. It was like a summer internship type of thing where they did a lot of weeding and harvesting and caring for the gardens, and they got paid for it. It was a grant sponsored activity, and they just loved it. And it was such a good thing for them. Their mom lives very close to here. Great. So I really admired the place, and I'm glad we're here. It's such a lovely place to hang out. So the reason I brought that up is because you've mentioned you didn't use the word regenerative. Something related to agriculture.
Yeah, I use
education.
Regeneration.
Oh, okay.
Regeneration is the name of my campaign. Regeneration Boulder.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I did catch on that somehow. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so to me, regeneration is such a beautiful concept. It implies how systems actively create their environment, heal their environment. It goes back to living systems principles. So to me, what Regeneration Boulder is about is how do we apply living systems principles into Boulder. And so I'm really into the science of living systems. And so in the science of living systems, there's 3 qualities to any living system, 3 primary qualities. This is mostly from the scientist Fritjof Capra, big author in this space, or the systems view of life. And he talks about 3 properties. One is autopoietic network, dissipative structure, and cognitive process. So big words, but cognitive process points that like living systems are.
I've already lost the train of thought.
Yes. Sorry, that was a little. 3
points for what's the umbrella concept?
3 characteristics of a living system.
Of a living system, gotcha.
And so a living system is, the tiniest living system that we're aware of is the cell. The cell is the microscopic living system. The biggest living system that we're aware of is the planet. Yeah. And James Lovelock and Lynn Margulis created the Gaia hypothesis, which basically demonstrated how the planet actually acts as a living system. And it meets these properties that we also see at the level of cell, which is that it's an autopoietic network. Autopoietic means self-making.
Autopoietic?
Autopoietic.
Poietic.
Yeah, autopoietic means self-making. That a living system is a self-making system. So it's like actively creating itself in relationship with the environment.
I can't ground that word into some other word that it seems like it ought to be related to. And I know auto, obviously, but poietic?
Poetic, like poem.
Poem.
Yeah, I think it has the same root as poem.
I see.
So it's like making, creation.
I see.
So autopoietic, to me, and so I'll just hop those other ones. Dissipative structure, permeable membranes. I was talking about permeable membranes, that a living system has a structure. Cognitive process, that it's a living system is knowing the environment. Like I'm using my senses and everything and knowing the environment around me, and that allows me to move in relation. But the first part that I think is really important is that autopoietic one, because I think that speaks to regenerative. I think autopoietic speaks to the same thing as regenerative. And I think that's a really important thing to ground into, because it emphasizes how it's important to like bring things back to the local level. At the level of the planet, it's like all the solutions we need are on the planet, and what we need is to participate in the planetary ecosystem, and the planet, with us being a part of it, can heal itself. Like climate crisis is a huge thing. And to me, what living systems theory points to is like this living system that is the planet is absolutely capable of self-healing. And that has to happen through us participating in it. So we have to move beyond our like controlling mode. But I also think that really applies to like, you know, we have our local ecosystems here in Boulder. We have our local ecologies. We have our local social ecology. And to me, this really points to applying regenerative wisdom is about like really getting embedded and being a part of the process. And by being a part of the process, being a part of Boulder, being a part of Boulder governance, by participating in it, we're able to help like Boulder heal and regenerate and evolve in a lot of ways. And it doesn't happen through this top-down control. It happens through our participation. And so this is like the level of, we can't force change, but if we participate in a system, the system has the potential to change itself in a lot of ways.
When you say you can't force change, you mean you can't force positive change? I mean, it seems like you can drop bombs on a country and change things by force of will, you know, and technology or whatever. But
I think you can, yes, you absolutely can force change. You can force positive change and you can force negative change. I think what I'm getting at is like the kind of change that is needed in the world cannot be forced.
Okay. Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. Autopoetic.
Yeah, sorry, I dropped a bunch of science terms.
Maybe I shouldn't dwell on it too much.
Autopoietic network, yeah.
And then it was dissipative, which I think of as, you know, like you drop a pile of sand and it scatters, but maybe that's not. Dissipative structures.
Tornado is a dissipative structure. It's not a living system, but at least within this theory, tornado is a dissipative structure, as in tornado has a form. Tornado has a certain form. It has a certain membrane. Yeah. That membrane will hold. It'll allow things to flow in and out. It doesn't have the autopoietic quality. It doesn't have the self-generating thing. Yeah. So it can't hold its form for long. Its form is a result of environmental conditions, whereas in an autopoietic system, its form is a result of internal conditions in relationship with the environment. So tornadoes, that dissipative structure there. But in our case,
and then it's certainly not the last one, cognitive.
It's not a cognitive process. And again, this goes back to, again, a lot of my philosophy is like we need to move beyond a very reductionist, mechanistic way of relating that we've had conditioned into it ever since like Descartes was like, I think, therefore I am. And we're like, oh, mind and body are two separate things. And Bacon's like, cool, scientific method. We're going to use it to dominate the earth. And like all of this is like a lot of scientific reductionism. And as you can see, I love science, but I think scientific reductionism is a really dangerous thing. And reductionism and mechanism and like the idea of a mechanical universe, I think all of that is actually being invalidated by a lot of living systems theory, by quantum physics, things that are understanding how interconnected all these things are and how a simple mechanistic view won't do.
So this feels like I'm getting in the weeds just a bit, but it feels like an important point to me. I'm not. Maybe you'll tell me otherwise. But is in this framework, is the planet undergoing cognitive processes? This is a cognitive living. You mentioned it was a living being, so I assume it's a living system. And how does the cognitive process fit into that?
Yeah, that one's interesting because it's really hard for us to. Because we're just a part of the system. We're a part of the system. And so it's really hard to understand how the system that we're a part of actually works. Yeah. Like, I highly doubt this cell in my body knows what is happening at this level of the whole.
It's not paying attention to this conversation at all. Like, my toenail doesn't give a shit about what we're talking about.
It's influenced by this conversation, but I don't think at the level of cognitive knowing, like, there's not a lot of, like, grasping. And so I think it's really hard to say what's happening at the level of the whole. I have a suspicion that there is some level of knowing at the level of the planet. Whether that means the planet is a living being, which is kind of suggested by Gaia hypothesis. You know, Gaia is like Greek goddess. Yeah, I don't know that. I don't know that we can know that. I'm fairly confident we as humanity don't know that. But I do think there, like, some level of cognitive processing is happening at that. It seems very likely that there's some level of cognitive processing. And because I think the cognitive processing is deeply interwoven with the regenerative capacities. Whether that means the intelligence of the planet is coming through, I think it's a beautiful thing to think. Like, there's a lot of people who believe it, and I think it's a really beautiful viewpoint to think like the planetary intelligence is coming through and acting through us to heal. Yeah. I don't know that with any kind of certainty, but
it also seems possible from like a very kind of like less mystical point of view. It could be like, you know, humans and the all these different ecosystems that we're part of to the planet are kind of like bees to the hive. You know, there's something really special going on with the hive that individual bees may or may not be completely aware of, and I feel like that's true with cities and with larger systems.
Yeah, and I think humanity is a great example of that. Like, because all of a sudden now we have the internet, which is like seems like a thing that we all take for granted, but it's a pretty new phenomenon. And like all of a sudden with the internet, and especially things like AI, all of a sudden you can ask an AI system something, and it responds from like a reflection of like humanity's collective knowledge in a really
as if it thought about it.
And I don't ascribe any agency to these systems. I think these systems are reflecting the consciousness that we're imbuing in them. But it does suggest that there is some kind of collective human intelligence. And that collective human intelligence is being reflected through things like internet and AI. And so I think the internet is one reason we're able to actually grasp a lot of these concepts, such as like collective intelligence and planetary intelligence and things like that, because all of a sudden we're having an experience of an intelligence that's beyond any one of us as individuals, but is kind of reflecting all of us together in a really interesting way.
Yeah, there's a lot to say about that. Actually, my day job, I work on AI. I'm in a research lab, and I work on large language models, and so I spend a lot of time thinking about how they're kind of interesting mirrors to humanity's output on the internet. It's a lot to say, but I guess one thing I kind of want to circle back, and this is a little tongue in cheek, but you're very you've got this holistic approach, and you come you're barefoot today, and you're wearing what are these pants you're wearing with the phrase on
yellow yoga pants.
I just wonder, like, are you going to be a good bureaucrat?
Yeah, I think I'm really good at talking to people. I'm really good at understanding people's viewpoints. I'm getting better and better at conveying and expressing my own viewpoints. I'm pretty good at like hearing a lot of different perspectives and synthesizing it. And so I think that's what I really add to the equation is I can hear a lot of different perspectives and bring them together, and also like look to understand for myself. Like I really care about understanding, and so I'm not just gonna like be a sponge that's like taking everybody's in and just like reflecting that. Like I'll hear what people are saying, come to my own conclusion, and like bring that forward. But I think I can do it in a way that will really support a lot more voices being included in the conversation. So I think that's what I bring to the political sphere.
Cool. Well, thank you for sharing that. That was a great answer. Thank you. Where would you like to go next? This podcast has been, kind of from the beginning, a lot about housing and thinking about how to build beautiful neighborhoods, build a more beautiful Boulder, how to share it better. So here's a question that I think you would enjoy answering. What do you think Boulder could do to be more inclusive and more welcoming to marginalized people?
Yeah, I mean that's huge. I have a lot of friends, particularly like a lot of Asian friends who've been like expressing being interested in moving to Boulder, and like I hear from almost one of them like they're concerned there's not going to be more people that look like them. And I think this is something that a lot of people of color experience is they don't want it, because it's not just the affordability gap. The affordability gap is very real, but what I think is an even bigger thing that we don't often understand, and it's because it's hard to address with policy, it's like a cultural thing, is that because there's so whiteness and like white people are so prevalent in Boulder, it's hard for people.
And visibility is a key aspect of that.
Yeah, white people are the most visible in Boulder, and so it's hard for people of color, I think, to feel safe to express. I think in general, most people in Boulder are going to be really caring and welcoming and want that. And it's challenging because we have to address that like there's very good reasons that people of color don't feel safe to express in primarily white spaces. So it's a really hard problem to solve. I've been thinking about it. I don't know that I have clear solutions. I think it starts with bringing a lot more people of color who are involved in Boulder and who are connected to larger communities of color, bringing them into the conversation and asking them more directly, like what we can do to be more welcoming to more people. I was having a conversation with Tim Thomas, Boulder Housing Partners, and like from what I heard from him, it's like 1% of Boulder's population is Black, but 5% of them are in Boulder.
I think 7 is the number he uses. 7%.
7% are in Boulder Housing Partners. Yeah, that's right. Thank you for that.
I think 7% of the population in Boulder Housing Partners is Black.
Yes, and only 1% of total Boulder.
That's right.
Yeah. And so it's like discovering where marginalized populations are already there, and rather than trying to get them all to come out here, like going where the people already are and helping to empower those spaces to help their voice be more heard. And so I think that's going to be a big thing, is like city council, city government, but also just like the city of Boulder, the people of Boulder. We have to do a better job of going to where marginalized communities are and bringing empowerment there, rather than like saying y'all should come over here because maybe they don't feel safe over here. And I don't think until we bring it, like help bring ourselves into their space, I think that's needed to help create safety. So
I really appreciate that. I struggle with this chicken and egg thing that is, there's a puzzle to it, because I went to a showing up for racial justice event where a white man got up and said the structures of our cities, the zoning, the exclusionary effect that it has in the way that people have access to different neighborhoods or different kinds of housing. These are systems built by white people.
Yeah.
And so to ask people of color to come in and dismantle that for us, in a sense, you know, if we built the system, maybe it's our responsibility to help dismantle it or reframe it or rebuild it. And so, yeah, I think the way you teed that up is kind of nice. It's like you weren't saying have them come in and do all the work, but be in partnership and to have their voices heard. But there's also another aspect of it where it's like we don't really welcome the market certainly doesn't welcome a variety of incomes and a variety of ethnicities just by kind of the sheer brute force of market exclusion. And I also feel like there's maybe an aspect where if we build affordable housing and they're beautiful neighborhoods, they will come, you know. And I wish I hadn't said they, because, you know, I want to be inclusive and not othering. I was trying to kind of follow the field of dreams, you know, sort of build it and they will come, you know. But
and one of the things I've been thinking about, and I'm not convinced this is a good idea, and I want more feedback. I'd be curious to hear what you think about it. But like, I think it could be a genuinely good idea. Like, level up our affordable housing programs, create a wider diversity of affordable housing options, but then have affordable housing that's set aside, prioritizing groups, and not just racial groups, but different cultural expressions, almost like pulling on a census of Boulder and being like, where are we lacking in diversity? And then targeting our affordable housing to increase that diversity, to help Boulder be a more diverse place. And I recognize that can feel exclusionary, because then it's like white people are like, well, we've been marginalized too. And a lot of white people in this culture have been marginalized. And so like doing something like that could create a risk of excluding some white people who need affordable housing as well. And so I don't know what that's going to look like, but I think there's a way that we can like prioritize support in a way that can actually increase the diversity here to help Boulder be a more welcoming place. And I think there's a lot of ways that can go right, and I suspect there's ways it can go wrong. And so I just want to like bring that as an idea into the field. Yeah,
I don't have an opinion about it. That's probably worth sharing. I guess my initial thought is just like, let's talk about it. You know, let's have a lot, you know, conversations around that. I think that sort of idea demands just a lot of input from a lot of different kinds of people and thinking carefully about how that might work, you know. But I sort of like, I don't know how to think about it off the top of my head. Interesting.
I think that in general, we should be thinking as a city a lot more seriously about how we can increase diversity, right? Especially racial and cultural diversity, how we can increase that in our city. And like, I don't think any of us know what the right answers are, but I think that we need to bring that a lot more seriously into our dialogue.
I would also just add economic diversity and also like age diversity. Like it's amazing how our suburbs and our, if you just regionally, you know, they stratify by income at very small levels. This entire space will be one level of income, and then along with that, we end up being very stratified by age too. You can look at the demographics of Boulder. West Boulder west of Broadway is aging very rapidly, and the schools are in trouble. And
I think that's great.
So I think I think age. I would like to figure out how to have neighbors that are all kinds of ages and all kinds of ethnicities and all kinds of income levels, and that's kind of my hope. That's
great. Yeah, age, economic, cultural, racial, just general people diversity. I think that's super key. Trying to decide, I'm like, you can pivot to two different angles there. I'm going to just share both and see which one wants to land, because there's another angle that I really care about, which is like increasing biodiversity like the regenerative thing, and then there's the other thing I care about, which is like better infrastructure. And this is where I'm really curious about how technology solutions can support us understanding where the gaps are in diversity, how we can level up our technology, level up our use of it. Google, I think Google has, I'm critical of plenty of things, but and I don't think Google is a very data-driven company. I worked at Google for 2 years, and they're a very data-driven company. And I think there's a lot of good things about that. I think there's a limitation. It can become reductionist being so data-driven. So I think we need to be careful to not just be like, cool, metrics are all that matters, data is all that matters. But I do think we should use technology and use data better to help address some of these problems, such as diversity. So I really care about that. And I also really care about this other part of like increasing biodiversity in Boulder and really leveling up our ecology.
Well, I wonder if you wouldn't mind just starting with what you just said and tying that into housing policy and what your sensibilities are around what kind of housing we should build, what kind of rules should be changed.
Sweet. I think I can bring both of those in for that. I think that we need to be using our land more effectively. And I don't think this purely means more densification, but effective densification. Like there are certain places where it would be wiser to be a little denser in terms of how we're living, to allow for more ecological diversity, to allow for more community gardens like this. Like, it is amazing that we have this in Boulder. And I think that if we were being more intelligent with how we are housing people, like with how we're living together in shared space, if we're being more intelligent with that, then we can have more community open spaces. And because like densification has this like yucky feel to it in a sense, because like, oh, if it's so dense, then like it feels claustrophobic. Mm-hmm. But I think if we're utilizing density to create more open spaces, then that kind of addresses the problem and like helps us also be more well connected. Because when we have shared open space, when we have shared community spaces, there's spaciousness, and it's a spaciousness that we all share. Because like in our Western world mindset, it's like super individualized, and so it's like my space. Like I want this my space.
I've got this monocropped exactly. Landscape in my backyard. I think there's all kinds of density that is good and that's bad, and there, like whether it's. But I do feel like density is key, because we have such poorly utilized land in places where, like I live in a neighborhood where there's lots of single family homes and large yards. And I would not say that these yards are havens for bees or insects. They're just sort of like wastelands for grass, and often it's not even nice grass. It's just it's just wasted space. And I feel like if we all demand a large house on a large lot from the planet, we all ask the planet, please give me my lot with my 2-car garage that I can start filling up with shit. It's a lot to ask of the planet and a city that's trying to be ecologically friendly. And so I always feel like the more I can minimize my footprint of how much space that I need and how much stuff I need to cram into it, it's like it makes room for other people and makes room for more open space.
I mean, if we have a huge plot of land, you can put a bunch of little tiny houses there, have people living together much more effectively. You can even have a little space within tiny houses, so people like still like get to feel a little bit of spaciousness. But then all those tiny houses are like on a huge plot of shared land, and so there's a lot of like community space. And so that's what I'd like to see the city thinking a lot more intelligently. Is like, how do we how do we bring forward innovative housing structures that are going to support a lot more people living together and support all of those people feeling spacious, feeling open, and also support them being connected to community. Because if you have a bunch of people on shared land, like this is the intentional village, like everybody, not everybody, but a lot of people in my community want to have 100 acres of land where they can have a bunch of tiny houses and live with their community. And I'd like to see something like that happening in an urban environment that like allows an emergent kind of community.
Yeah.
Like that's the idea of intentional community. This is the idea of like emergent community. How do we bring forward a community that emerges because you've set up the right conditions?
Yeah, I love that, because I really believe that you can put a lot of people in a small space and they can feel more isolated than they did before. If the structures aren't conducive to connecting with nature or to connecting with other people, it's possible to have density that's like really horrible for planet and people. You know, so I like the idea of kind of figuring out that balance.
Yeah.
Cool. So I guess we didn't really make the rubber hit the road on that in terms of like zoning changes you might want, or
well, I think zoning changes is like right now that kind of vision can't happen because there's zoning laws in place that prohibit having multiple like tiny units on thing, and like the permitting process is annoyingly long. And so I think this is a level of improving our processes, like having it be where it doesn't take so long to get permits, but also in general zoning changes that allows for these kind of spaces, like zoning laws that are less focused on like, because a lot of the zoning laws are built out of like really old, outdated classes systems that are like not allowing for diversity of different like expressions and lifestyles. Felt a little abstract, but there needs to be a shift in zoning laws such that we can have a lot more buildings on a plot of land, given it allows for enough open space. You don't take a 2-acre plot of land and fill the entire thing with an apartment complex, but maybe you fill an acre of it with houses densely packed and an acre of it with open community spaces. And so I think if our zoning laws were a little more flexible to allow for those kinds of things, such that it is prioritizing ecological harmony, but it also like allowing for denser peopling.
Sounds good. I'd like to see the proposal, So,
my plan is to like meet up with like people like Lauren and Ryan and like ground that into some clearer policy things. I'm still learning a lot in terms of how policy works. So that's my big learning thing.
Yeah, something that I say that's kind of adjacent to this, or maybe right on point, is that I would like Boulder to be a welcoming place for more people, because I feel like people need to make choices that are ethical as it relates to the housing market. I just said a minute ago, I don't think we should all ask the planet for a 2-car garage and a large single-family home on a large lot. That's like, we can't all do that. And we all need to be making decisions about our footprint and how we make those housing decisions. And so we need to give people a lot more options about all that. So I want to bring people into Boulder so that we're not, increasing the footprint of the ex-urban sprawl that's going on in the Denver metro area. But as we bring people in, I actually am a NIMBY in the sense that I do not like other people's cars. I don't want them in my street. I don't want them in my backyard. I certainly don't want other people's cars in my backyard. So I feel like we need to like, just kind of as like a policy direction, I hope that the city will move towards thinking about ways to really take cars out as we add people. And I know people react to that in a variety of ways. Some people are like, woohoo, that sounds great. And other people are like, hey, that's going to really impact certain kinds of people that need to go to here, here, and here. And I don't want to eliminate cars overnight. Maybe I do in the long term. I feel like we could make it work in the long term. But
this might be a hit on me political. We'll see. I would like to see Boulder be a place that has very little cars in it within a few decades, and I think that's really possible. And I think it can be done in a way that is inclusive and caring. I think the more beautiful Boulder that I see would have a lot more space for people and nature, because we wouldn't have all the space for all the asphalt, all the space for cars, like driving and parking. I think in the intermediary, right now people need cars. We do not have the systems in place that makes it easy for a lot of people to live without cars.
Yeah.
And so I think we need to be very careful about how we get there. But I would like to see us moving towards a direction where we become less and less car dependent. And from my understanding, that's already in Boulder's master plan. Boulder's master plan has in it like prioritizing walking and prioritizing biking, then comes public transit, then comes cars. Like, as my understanding, that's already in the master plan. So that's where we already have expressed a desire to move towards. It just doesn't seem like we're really walking the talk with that. And what that could look like, I think one of the key missing pieces right now is we need to have, first off, we need to create a solution that makes it easier to not have a car. What I would like to see, I don't know if this is the best solution, but it's the best one I have so far, is a better car sharing system. I think Colorado rideshare is a thing. I haven't looked into that. I know there's Zipcar here or whatever. I'm curious.
I'm a member of the car share, so
cool.
I use it quite frequently. It's a really nice.
Yeah, and is that subsidized for people of lower income?
I don't know. Yeah,
I think that would be a huge step. If that's not already there, subsidizing a ride-sharing system for people of lower income and kind of increasing capacity for that system. So there's more ride shares in more places. So it becomes easier for people to use a car when they need it. I think that's the key thing. Maybe also something like better personalized shuttles where we have public transit that's going across direct things. But if we're using technology well, people could say, hey, I need to go here, here, here. And you have like a shuttle that's going and just picking people up along the way. And so can actually drop people off at their houses while relying a little bit more on public infrastructure. I haven't quite formulated that whole vision, but I think something like that, something that would allow for a more personalizable and customizable public transit while leveraging things like Colorado rideshare. I think that would make it a lot more possible if we like lift those platforms up, make them more subsidized for people of lower income. That's going to make it a lot more possible for people to not have a car. Yeah. Once we have that, once we make it possible for people to not have a car, then we need to start maybe making it a little harder to have a car. Like that's the one that's going to be controversial, but I think it can be done a good way. And I think ultimately it will support more people. Like if you have more things where it's like, if you're parking a car long-term, you need a permit. Like somebody was just talking about how, it was somebody testifying at the occupancy thing. Like they saved $185 on their rent each month because they opted to not have a car space. If you have things like that where it was like decoupling.
Yeah, you start by decoupling and making the parking pay for itself.
Exactly, make the parking pay for itself. That way people have to really make a conscious choice to have a car and they recognize that there's trade-offs, because the truth is having cars costs Boulder. It costs the land of Boulder. It costs the people of Boulder. That does not mean we shouldn't have it, but it should cost something. And we should make sure that cost does not land on people of lower income. Like people of lower income should be able to apply for a subsidy that covers their cost of having a car if they need to have a car.
Yeah, I would also, exactly. That's key. Because I would also like to just say that a huge part of affordability is if you can eliminate that massive expense of having a car and all the infrastructure that goes with it, it's a huge affordability issue. And so I would love for a lot more people of all economic situations to be able to live without a car, right?
Exactly.
And it shouldn't just be like a rich white guy's hobby, you know, like to live without a car, or just people that are really so poor that they have to use the bus to make their lives work. And of course, those folks will be really, their lives will be much better when we get a transit system that really works for a lot more people.
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
Cool. Well, I'm a big hater of asphalt, and something I was thinking about is we don't really appreciate what a destructive disturbance 40 feet of asphalt, 40-foot ribbon of asphalt is. Yeah. And we don't appreciate it because we're just surrounded by asphalt, and we just
agreed.
It's just we're just acclimated to it. But like imagine if there was a plan to build a 40-foot ribbon of asphalt right up that mountainside.
Oh God.
Everyone would be upset because hey, you're destroying the ecosystem. Yes. But every 40-foot ribbon of it that we live around is just like that. I mean, we have actually just taken the earth and put these giant gashes into it that it's totally unsustainable, and it's like these heat islands. And anyways, I want to have some dialogue around how to repurpose the space that asphalt is currently taking up.
Yeah.
And it's really tricky because our neighborhoods are just built around it with that assumption baked into place.
It's so hard.
And so, anyways, that's something I want to breathe creative imaginations into.
Yeah, I like that. And I'm going to share, like, there's the part that it's taking up space that could be used for ecological regeneration. Mm-hmm. There's the space that it's reflecting a bunch of heat, and so it makes our city hotter, which we are feeling right now. It's so freaking hot. It was like, And then I'm going to tell you the one that most people don't think about, which if you're walking around barefoot, asphalt makes your feet all black.
Oh yeah. And it's I think of it as like, I don't know if it's like microplastics on your skin, but it's like, it's petrochemicals on your skin.
I don't want that on my skin.
Your skin is part of your living organism.
I would like to be in a city where I can comfortably walk around barefoot a lot of places, and
including
right
the Club Municipal downtown, where you're going to be hanging out if you win election.
Yes. So I think reimagining how to use, because we start by my futuristic vision, very futuristic vision, is that we live in a future where we don't need cars at all, where maybe we have some kind of flying cars, who knows, maybe we figured out some kind of teleportation, and at one point we just decide we don't need the asphalt, and like we somehow help bioengineer a mushroom that we can like lay down over all the asphalt, and they just like eat it and turn it back in there. That's my very idealistic vision.
So I'll counter that with something that feels a little more practical. I love the pictures that you see in Europe where there's a light rail riding through the grass. There's like a lawn that they're basically riding through, and it's like, we could have nice things.
Because we could take out like the asphalt, we could have those bike lanes on the side, and now where we have like in Iris, maybe we are able to turn that from a 4-lane into a 3-lane, and we put those, and then at some point maybe we decide we don't need the 3-lane at all. We're just taking it out, and you have a light rail that's going through the middle, a bunch of grass, and then the bike lanes, or like something like that. And so repurposing it there, where like eventually we have light rail that's moving through. I would love to see something like that that allows people to get where they need to go in Boulder, and helps Boulder to be a more beautiful place, a more like ecologically sound place, and like there was another word that I was it just proved, and like just people should be able to get around Boulder and feel safer. It's safer because if you have light rail, if you have different transportation that's not relying so much on human agency, like it's kind of ridiculous that like I as a human am responsible for directing thousands of pounds of metal around, and like a lot of us don't hold that responsibility well, and then people on bikes end up getting hurt. And so we need to make it safer. And I think that means like, and this is where I think effective use of technology can be useful, because if we have like things like light rail or other systems, such that we're not relying on a human at the wheel of this like big thing that could hurt a lot of people, or if there are humans there, it's humans that are well trained and like no safety, then it becomes a lot safer, and it becomes so much easier for people to walk and bike all over the place.
Yeah, amen. Okay, well, I just want to open up an opportunity for you to, if you want to dive into something else that is like over here, perhaps. Like we've kind of been, I guess we have been talking about a lot of different things. So I don't mean to say we've been stuck on one subject or anything, but I did want to give you an opportunity to go somewhere else.
I wonder if we should dance for a bit on the more controversial topic of how we actually address like homelessness and like that in Boulder.
Sure.
It seems like that's the hot topic that everybody cares about addressing it, and we all have different ideas of how to go about it, and like everybody agrees that we want less homeless people on the street. Like Nicole has in many ways the most mature perspective. I'm a little less sure about removing the camping ban, but I think in general, like her reasons for it make sense. And I think it's just a really I think it's an important thing for us to dialogue more about, and I think it's important for us to do it in an open way such that we don't fall too quickly into polarity, because I'm really concerned that in this election, it's going to become about who's going to arrest all the homeless people and who's not. And I think that should not be the conversation. The conversation should be like, how do we actually holistically address this problem, and what's actually going to be effective?
Yeah. Well, this issue is a tough nut to crack, and it's difficult for me to wrap my head around. I've been known to tell people that when I talk to you, I think about it one way. When I talk to this person, I think about it another way.
And your conversation with Nicole, you said,
oh yeah, okay.
That.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, something that somebody said recently is, we have an expectation that the roads will not have people's things on them, you know, when we're driving around.
Yeah.
And what does it say about our prioritization of bicycles when we allow people's things to be on the bike paths? Like that would be unacceptable in our car-centric spaces, and so and I'm like, and as someone who really feels really strongly about getting more people on bikes and wanting people to feel safe on route where they're going on a bike, I feel like it's a kind of a privilege of a able-bodied white man to feel safe on the bike paths as they are now, because I bike all times of the day, late at night. I don't really worry about the encampments. They're not bothering me. Good for me, It's like,
because I'm the same way. I feel very fine biking down the bike paths with encampments, but I know a lot of people, especially female-bodied people, who do not feel that safe.
Of course, yeah, and and so when I'm talking to a transportation person that cares about cycling, I'm like, of course we can't have tents and sleeping bags in the underpasses and that kind of thing. And then, there's the whole pushing peas around the plate metaphor of like, are you solving anything by disrupting their lives and making them move to somewhere else when you haven't given them a place to go? So. Super ineffective strategy that's kind of like orthogonal to whether or not the situation overall is getting better or worse.
Yeah, because Nicole makes a really great point that we are just like, it's just pushing the problem around. And there's a lot of evidence that just pushing the problem around does not do it, does not effectively address things. And there needs to be some level of like structure and safety. I think that we have a tendency to use too much force, but I'm wary of just being so reactive to that we try to use no force at all. I think some level of force is necessary. I was walking under the underpass the other day and I saw somebody smoking meth. I hadn't seen that in person. I knew it was happening, but that was my first time just like walking by and seeing somebody hit a meth pipe. And I'm like, oh, that's right there. And I walk around barefoot sometimes and I'm like, do I need to be careful like that I'm not stepping on a needle? And I'm like, that's not a thing I've worried about. In Boulder. And I would prefer not to worry about that in Boulder. And my worry about no enforcement at all is it becomes overly coddling and overly enabling behaviors. And I think some level of force is necessary to get people to the help that they actually need. Because if we're just like, everybody do whatever they want, people end up in places where they're actually harming themselves with like a lot of substance abuse. And so we do need to create some level of structure, but I don't think the current thing of just like enforcement sweep is going to work. Like I really think we have to step up our game in terms of like having people who are trained in mental health and relationship, like to be there, reaching out to people who are on the street, understanding what they need, helping them to get the help that they actually need. And only if nothing is happening from that do you use enforcement. I also think there's a level of like, we do need to prioritize enforcement in certain things. Like I don't like the safe zones campaign. I feel like that's just like a little bit overly symbolic. And God, it's so fucking complex. I'm so struggling with this one.
I always get worried when people campaign under the banner of like, it's for the children, I always get, but my cynical hackles get raised whenever it always feels like it's reactionary and not really good policy. But
so I don't think that's the right solution. Of just like the for the children. I do think it is completely symbolic and it's just like getting people riled up. And I think there's some elements that are being expressed in that could be intelligent. Like what would happen if we prioritize not having camps on the bike path? Maybe that would enable, and that's well communicated. That's well communicated that like there's a higher priority for keeping people off the bike path so that bikers can feel safe. But then people who are unhoused know that And so they can make a conscious choice to go somewhere and know that they're not going to be as disturbed. Because like Nicole makes the point, it's like when you're constantly moving people around, that like it harms their livelihood. It creates stress in them, which is stopping them from getting the help they need. And so if we don't get rid of the camping ban, but we express like, look, if you're over here, we're probably not gonna sweep you for a little while. But if you're here, we might have to get rid of you to like ensure. And like kind of shifting the priority there and letting it be communicated so people know where their options are, and like letting that be a temporary solution while we really actively work on putting in place services and structures that are going to actually get people the help that they need.
Yeah. Well, part of this conversation that is just ongoing, a lot of people are talking about and having similar conversations as what we're discussing right now. There's an aspect of it where it feels like we're not dreaming big enough, like we're not thinking large enough, like, and it's kind of tragic because like my kids have grown up here in Boulder and their entire lives have been shaped by the fact that there's homeless people around, you know, right. And it's not like I shield their eyes or anything, like, you know, but it's there's a kind of a callousness of our culture that has just gotten used to it, and we're just angry that these people are inconveniencing and making our spaces uglier or whatever. And I don't know, it's just like when you just think about the economic capacity of Boulder and the United States, North America, the world. And I know economic capacity is tricky, and it's all related to what the planet is willing to allow, you know. But we have a lot of ability to shape the world around us and to make things abundant for people. And I just don't, there's a part of me that says, okay, 800 people outside at the last point in time survey, that's way too many, and it represents a lot of suffering. It's also like we could do this.
Yeah,
it's not tens of thousands of people in Boulder County, and it's hundreds of people in Boulder County.
Yeah, and I think the point that's really important what you're saying is like if we just try to push it away, we're blinding ourselves from a problem that is affecting a lot more people than just us here in Boulder. Like homelessness is affecting the whole world, but especially our country. I think it's very, very rampant here, and I think it is important. And I really appreciate you helping me see something fresh in that. It is really important that we don't just turn away and try to just put a Band-Aid on without addressing it at the root. And I think one of the things that really has to happen to get to the root of it is moving beyond our Boulder-centric viewpoint and actively, not just in every now and then, actively being in collaboration with Longmont, with Lyons, with Louisville, with Lafayette, with Denver, with so many of our neighbor cities to look at how we address this problem that's affecting this whole Front Range area. Because if one of us creates this is the thing, people, like so many cities are afraid of creating the right services because they're afraid that it's going to call all the people there. But if we're working as part of a larger ecosystem, then the load gets distributed.
Yeah, that suggests, emphasis at the state level for sure.
Yeah, state level, but also like local municipalities in relationship. Local municipalities in relationship while working at the state level. So then you have the grassroots and the top down that can kind of meet in the middle.
Cool. Anything else to say about that?
Yeah, I just really like your point that like how your children have been exposed to it and how it does help us widen our viewpoint. And I do think it's really important that we don't become callous to it and don't become so focused.
I guess my thought was more along the lines of like we've always had capacity to solve it, but we've never figured out how to do it.
Right.
And so like it would be nice if future generations didn't just feel like they were just inheriting and pushing along what we've always done.
Yeah.
And so there needs to be some kind of disruption that says, hey, we have the capacity and the ability to really do something big here and fix it.
And I think this is where we need a balance of humility and responsibility. Like we need to take radical responsibility for what we are capable of doing, and we need to have humility that we most of us really don't know. Because if we're coming in thinking we have all the solutions, it's going to be really hard to work together. And I think we need all of us to kind of come together, recognizing that we have a responsibility to take care of our community. And to do that, we have to like really come from a place of humility.
Okay. So this reminds me of something. There are a lot of experts on homelessness in Boulder, and a lot of people providing services. And I feel a little sheepish that I've been in so many conversations about homelessness, because I still am not like an expert, or maybe I shouldn't be talking about it, but I think a key here is like really engaging the people that have been serving that community and understanding what has worked and what hasn't worked. And again, like looking at other communities and seeing what they're doing that's working and not working. And
exactly.
So,
I think that's why I was hesitant to even enter in, because I don't want people to like be like, oh, that idea, that's a bad idea. I'm like, cool. Like, I'm sure plenty of my ideas might be bad ideas, and I want to embrace that. Because I do think that's a huge thing. We need to bring people who know a lot more than any one of us know, and bring it to a much larger conversation here, and a larger but also more generative conversation. Yeah.
Well, I think that's the whole goal of a good city council person, is someone who can grok a complex issue by bringing in smart people and connected people and listen carefully.
Yeah.
So, all right. Any parting shots?
Yeah. I feel really excited about what's happening in Boulder right now. I think we have some really amazing candidates running, and I'm very humbled just by being a part of this process to see how many people there are that care deeply about Boulder and that are looking deeply at these issues. And so I think we're in a really good place to move forward in a really good way as a city, and to really help the people of Boulder, but to also play a much bigger part in like what's happening in the world at large. And so I'm really grateful that I get to play a part, and I hope that people will make use of me. Let me be an instrument for the good, and let me be in the right relationships that allows me to really serve this planet. So, and this local community. So yeah, I'm glad you have allowed me to come and speak. This has been a really informative conversation. I've loved hearing your viewpoints. I've loved hearing what comes through me. I'm some type of surprised even by that. And I'm really looking forward to being in conversation with more people around what really matters. And so my invitation is to anybody who's listening to this to, let me know what you think. Let me know where I can improve my viewpoint, and let me know how I can be a better servant to what's happening in Boulder, and a better participant in this. And I'm really, really committed to continuing to show up for this community and doing what I can to help make it a more beautiful place.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I love meeting people who are passionate about making Boulder better, making it more beautiful. And so thanks for being one of those people. It's really cool to get a chance to visit with you today.
Absolutely. And I really hope that we're able to do something so beautiful here in Boulder that, like I said before, like that sharing Boulder becomes not just about sharing with the community what's happening in Boulder, but sharing the amazing things that are happening in Boulder, because I think we have the potential to like really like be a little bit revolutionary in terms of how we exist as a city.
Yeah.
And if we really create a model for what a city can be that goes beyond all of our like limitations, like I think we could really help inspire a lot of other communities around the country. And put ourselves in relationship with those communities and learn from them of course as well, and be in a larger global conversation around what does local governance look like, and that's what I would like to be a part of, is how do we share Boulder in that way. And so I'm so grateful that you are sharing Boulder.
Oh, great, thank you. That's a really sweet compliment. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Aaron. Appreciate your conversation.
Thanks so much, Phil. Absolutely.
Gonna find me a residential pedestrian district where I can gracefully grow older. Gonna spend my remaining years sharing Boulder. Thank you for listening to Sharing Boulder. Please support the podcast by sharing it with your friends and neighbors. You can contact me at linktree.com/Philip Ogren, which you can find by searching for Linktree Philip Ogren,
or by visiting sharingboulder.us, where you can also find show notes and previous episodes. This episode of Sharing Boulder was produced by Philip Ogren and edited by Catherine Avery. The music was created by Nathaniel Ogren and Sack Lunch. Keep sharing, Boulder!